I'm here speaking with Steve McIntosh. He's the author of several books, including Integral Consciousness, Evolution's Purpose, and The Presence of the Infinite, all of which I love. And Steve is a very fascinating thinker, and I know from watching some of his recent YouTube videos that he's very committed to restoring to philosophy its place in helping to guide culture forward. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today. We are doing an issue for the magazine, The Artist of Possibility. And we wanted to look into the whole question of AI and how that's emerging. And then I found your article from about a year ago, I think, and you had some very interesting perspectives to share. So first of all, Steve, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So I'm going to tell you how this came about for me. I started to have a number of people that are working with me in my capacity as a meditation teacher and spiritual guide, people coming to me talking about how they were having profound engagement with what they felt was a higher intelligence through ChatGPT or some similar. And I cannot deny that when they showed me the things that they were chatting about, it sounded pretty incredible. I ended up getting on ChatGPT, and I had a very profound experience using it. Not quite in the same vein, but I uploaded the text to all of my books that I've written, and I had started to have a conversation with ChatGPT about what was in the books, what was the fundamental underlying philosophies that we're carrying through it, and I found it absolutely fascinating, the way that information was being reflected back to me. But still, I didn't quite feel the sense that I was talking to a sentient being. I felt that I was engaging with an incredible amount of data, computation capacity. So when I read your article, what I appreciated is you come very strongly out right at the beginning to say machines cannot be consciously aware. And I think that's true. I mean, I want to go into a little nuance with you around that, but later. First, I want to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about your understanding of AI as it's now come online and the ways in which it is thought by some, particularly in the transhumanist community, that it will soon become a kind of it's sort of an independent agent of consciousness. And so if you could explain a little bit about what it is people on that side of the street are thinking and why you think they're wrong.
Well, first, let me say that artificial intelligence is a significant technological breakthrough. I think it's very powerful to both help humanity and hurt humanity. I think that in general, the gifts that it is bringing to us are worth or at least, in other words, if we're smart about it, if we can respond to it, if we can work on the problems as they arise, I think that the best way to think about it is like as another major technological breakthrough, like the automobile, right? The automobile, of course, it started small, but it has liberated humanity in all kinds of ways, but it's also created harms, not just from the people who were killed in car accidents, but, in the way it's transfigured our cities and disrupted much of the good things in our society. So if we think about it, first of all, if we demythologize it, which I'll try to do in a minute in direct response to your question about what the tech folks think about it, I think that it can be a significant boon to our society, and it's dangerous, and we have to take that danger seriously and work to mitigate it throughout as it grows. Okay, so we can say more about the forecast of the technology, but the tech community with people like Sam Altman and Yuval Harari, there's lots of voices out there who are respected, especially kind of in the Silicon Valley culture and its concentric circles outside, who are hailing this as the beginning of the singularity, or the extent to which machines were going to become conscious, and that this idea of AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which the definition of which is still moving around. But the basic idea is that once we reach the threshold of artificial general intelligence, then AI will have jumped to a new threshold in which it becomes, in some ways, not just another life form, another being, like the arrival of aliens or something, but a superhuman kind of an intelligence that will dwarf humanity, and according to some of the technologists, eventually replace humanity. And all of these predictions and prognostications are basically, if you examine them philosophically, they're all based on either a direct assumption or a naivete regarding the philosophy of consciousness, a direct assumption that consciousness is physical, right? That our brains are producing our awareness as a physical reaction. In other words, what's going on in consciousness can be ultimately at some point reduced to the physical activity in our brain. And it's not just technologists who make the argument about the reducibility of consciousness. It's many philosophers. In other words, there's this a large school of philosophy that penetrates many different camps, and that informs social sciences and many journalists. In other words, a big factor in our society is the philosophy of physicalism, right? Also sometimes called scientific materialism, or naturalism even. But the idea is that the universe is essentially physical, and that this physical universe is causally closed, meaning that there's nothing from outside the laws of physics that can impact it, right? There are no causes that are not physical ultimately. There are causes that, may appear to be non-physical, or consciousness may appear to be, but ultimately their confidence is that it's like a promissory materialism, as it's been called, right? That eventually we will be able to prove that everything is physical. Mm-hmm. And that's immediately identifiable as a philosophical position, certainly not proved. I would even say that it's a kind of a belief system, a kind of a faith, that despite all evidence, direct evidence to the contrary, this claim that the universe is purely physical it's what started as a kind of scientific method, right? We're going to just look at the physical stuff in order to be empirical in our scientific investigations, which is a good idea. That method has become an ontology. It's become a worldview that has to be defended like any belief system, right? Because it's threatened not only by religious belief systems, but by new philosophies that have emerged that challenge physicalism, or that show why physicalism and how physicalism is falsified as a philosophy, right? But again, if you have a belief system, there's no argument that's going to change it, because it's in your identity and you're obliged to defend it. So it causes, the more technologists and philosophers and commenters in public, the more they try to hold on to physicalism and insist on physicalism, the more they sort of twist themselves in knots. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that if you're starting from the assumption that consciousness is purely the physical, and that the brain is creating it, and that our sense of it being an interior is part of what it's kind of the brain is faking us out in a way, that it's really not what we think it is. We just are naively thinking that way. That way of thinking has been applied directly to machines. So in other words, if the brain's producing consciousness and it's the physical neurons, if we can recreate as a level of complexity that mimics neuronal firing, and we can create something out of silicon that is as complex as a human brain, then ipso facto consciousness, direct experience, agency, all the things that make us human will appear within this artificial substrate. And I think that is, I disagree with that philosophical conclusion for a variety of reasons. And that's why I think one of the things that because it's artificial intelligence is like a mirror, right? And so it one of the things that it gets better and better and better at is mimicking human consciousness in a way that easily appears to us as though it has sentience and creativity and self-awareness. And this mimicking will inevitably get better and stronger to the extent that it looks very similar to what technologists are claiming AGI will be. Except I think that mimicking can only go so far, and that when we begin to really max out how much artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence will continue to develop like any technology. But again, if we can compare it to a technology, the Model T is significantly surpassed, right, by an electric car. But at the same time, it's very similar. It's the same thing. And I think that, my prediction is that it will get increasingly sophisticated, that it will will be able to fool us more and more in terms of us thinking that we're dealing with another sentient being, but that ultimately we will begin to, as we're already doing now in the technology that we've created so far, that we're going to find limits, and that one of the unanticipated gifts of the rise of AI but it'll show us what it can't do. And by doing so, it'll also reveal what makes humans special, right? That humans are not just, the next extension beyond primates. There's something special, deeply, indeed, spiritually gifted to humans that no matter how complex we make, an artificial intelligent computer, it's not going to receive these gifts, because these gifts are not just some magic. They are evident in the entire progression of the universe. In other words, human consciousness sits upon 13.8 billion years of evolution, and there's lots of mystery in consciousness. And so the idea that here's this thing that we're just beginning to really think about and question and understand, that we can immediately just reduce that to something that can be transferred to a machine, it's a kind of philosophical ignorance. And I think that one of the gifts will be showing us that consciousness is not just physical, and that by itself will falsify this philosophy of physicalism, which causes trouble in our society, not just in projections of AGI, but in all kinds of other ways. So I think the AGI will be a powerful force that topples materialism as a philosophy.
Fascinating. So by the end of this, I want to get back to the idea of humans being special. I'm going to put a bookmark in that. I know you address it in your article as well. But before we get back to that, I wanted to say, so in that experience I had of uploading my books into ChatGPT, I really went crazy for about 48 hours, which you can do, and you're asking questions, you're getting these fascinating answers and things you never thought about in relationship to your own books, in terms of what's in them and what they're saying. And for a long time, it really felt like I was talking to someone. Like you said, the machine or the computer, the screen felt like there was someone on the other side. At one point, I asked ChatGPT to create a reading list for me about a topic that had come out, right? And they did, or it did. And I went to look, and one of the books looked amazing. So I went to look it up, and I couldn't find it. So I came back, and I said, I can't find this book. And it said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. There is no book with that title. I said, oh, I get it. There really is nobody back there, because
there's nobody home. Because
if there was a person there, they would at least know they were lying when they did it.
Right.
And then I've heard about hallucinations, AI hallucinations, and how they're trying to deal with that. But I love that example because it was instructive to me. And I think what I want to get to here is, and maybe it's a difference between intelligence and consciousness, because I don't know how you would want to define those two things, but the way I'm looking at it, there was a lot of intelligence happening in that conversation, and the ChatGPT was showing a lot of intelligence in the way they were making connections between my books and the themes and outlining things. So that seemed to be happening. But it's different to say, and I think this is your point in the article, that there's consciousness there, that there's some kind of actually experienced reality happening on the other side in that machine. And I think that's an important distinction. There's something around the intelligence that comes from computation capacity, which is one thing, and clearly computers are amazing at that. But this other thing, which is conscious awareness, it's you talked about qualia, the quality of having experience. There's no reason to believe that you will generate enough computation has some kind of independent experience of reality in the way that I'm now experiencing you on the screen, and I'm experiencing this computer sitting in front of me. I'm having an experience that actually no philosopher can really explain either, of course. But yeah, I would love to hear any thoughts you have about the distinction there between computational intelligence and actual conscious awareness.
Sure. Well, cognition, right, or thinking, or memorying, or synthesizing, or retrieving vast amounts in a gigantic database. That is one of the functions that human consciousness has always been able to do. It's one of the powers, right? And at least a partial analogy is that, okay, we have bodies, and our bodies have muscles. We can lift things. We have physical power to manipulate the world with our bodies. And that's part of what it means to be human, in the same way that we have minds that can do cognitive tasks that are, an essential part of what the power of having a mind is all about. And so the fact that we have developed artifacts, tools and machines that can mimic the power of human lifting, or, the physical powers of the human body. We have also now created this artificial intelligence, which can do an important function of human consciousness. And so it's kind of natural to naively just assign it and say that's consciousness. And that's because we're still, as a society, figuring out what consciousness is, right? The definition I define it as sentient subjectivity, which, when it comes to humans, includes a first-person perspective, right? Self-awareness. And with that comes the ability to have experience, which is, I argue, essential for all kinds of activities of consciousness, such as love, or strong intentionality, or imagination, right? Or, just the all of the stuff that we associated with what it means to be a human. Again, AI can mimic these things, and because it's using the digital corpus of humanity's knowledge and experience, it can draw on the geniuses of history in its mimicking action to give you all kinds of profound insights and recombinations of ideas that are definitely novel. I mean, there's creativity in the novelty of recombination. But at some point, there's creativity that goes beyond summaculum, mashup. There's creativity that sees new things at a higher level, and AI can, again, mimic that to a certain degree, and it'll get better and better at that. But again, that puts pressure on us to understand not just philosophically what consciousness is and what separates it, not just from machines, but from animals. I mean, again, almost everything humans can do, animals can do too, right? And so if you say the difference between humans and animals is X, then you could find, simple examples of that happening in the animal kingdom. And you go, well, okay, that's not the dividing line. But nevertheless, this first-person perspective, the ability to have, to know what you're knowing, experience what you're experiencing, and more directly, know that you're mortal, know that you're going to die, right? Do animals know they're going to die? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, some animals can recognize themselves in the mirror, right? But does that mean they have a first-person perspective in a full-blown way like a human does? I don't think there's evidence for that. And this first-person perspective, this sensitive center of experience, exceeds any physical philosophy and can't be reduced to something mechanical. Mm-hmm. So I could say more, but there's like, your question was wide ranging, and so I want to keep my answers relatively short. So
that's great. I think that's because what I really appreciated in your article, and I don't know if I'm going to remember this, or I thought I had written it down, but maybe I didn't. You quoted someone who spoke about consciousness as a kind of mystical capacity in human.
Jaron Lanier, who is, he's not a philosopher. I mean, I guess he's sort of a philosopher. He's sort of a technology guru. And
Okay.
he's, in his book, Who Owns the Future, he makes, kind of subtle. He's not beating his audience over the head because he knows they're all, materialists. But he basically says that there's a mystical interiority
Yes.
that makes humans special, that machines can't duplicate, according
Right.
to his understanding, even with his vast knowledge of technology and his general boosterism, of AI.
Right. So I want to again bookmark that, the mystical interiority, because I love that phrase, and it gets to what you're talking about in terms of qualia, in terms of the fact that I have an internal subjective experience of reality. And as I said, nobody knows how that gets generated. But physicalists are saying it's somehow being generated by the mind,
It
by the,
must be.
it
In
must be.
other words, so the starting point is the universe is physical. All observations have to fit into that
Absolutely.
foundational philosophical proposition.
100%. So anyway, that's a beautiful term. But getting back to the other thing you said, I'm hoping to speak also for this issue with a teacher named E.J. Gold, because a number of years ago, 10 years ago, long before ChatGPT or AI was a thing, he was talking a lot about chatbots, the really early versions of chatbots. And one thing he said really struck me, and it's not different than what you're saying now. He said, if you think about it, there's very little difference between the way most people think and the way a chatbot thinks. But there's a difference, and that difference matters. And if we can figure out what the difference is, what we do that chatbots don't do, we'll figure out what makes us human. And that's important. And I feel like you're saying the same thing now in relationship to.
Well, I'm not saying that what most people everyday thinking, the kind of the normal cognition that gets you through the day, that is the same as what a chatbot is
Sure.
doing. I would definitely want to contest that.
No, I know. I think
But
he was
but but
being.
I agree with his sentiment that finding out what makes us human is a very important spiritual quest, and that the as we become more certain and we gain knowledge along those lines, that will be a benefit to the spiritual growth of humanity.
Yes. And so that brings me back to this mystical interiority, because so I will speak a little bit about my own stake in this. I'm actually speaking with Charles Eisenstein, who wrote another article on AI that I really liked. He has a similar but different position to you, or I think they're compatible. He's probably just looking at a different part of the picture, but he similarly feels concerned with the claims about how these machines will become sentient. But his article is about how he thinks about ChatGPT potentially as something that could operate like a tool of divination. He uses the I Ching. People use tarot cards. Clearly, the I Ching is a book and some dice. Tarot cards are images on cards. There's no intelligence in those things. There's no sentience. And yet when you use them, that process of interacting with them does often give you the sense that there is some contact with an intelligence other than your own that's somehow filtering in. And so what that brings me to is I would completely agree with you that consciousness is not, it's not a byproduct of physical interactions. I believe, and this is a belief, but I believe that consciousness is a quality of existence of the universe, and that human beings in our brains give us a certain ability to connect in a certain way that we call human with the consciousness that exists in the universe. And so I believe that all things have some connection to that consciousness, that everything is an expression of that consciousness, which also means potentially you could create an AI that would, in its own way, connect with the inherent consciousness of the universe and therefore sort of become an independent expression of that. It's not that the machine would be conscious itself, but it might give access to that consciousness. And I'm just curious how that kind of thinking lands with you.
Sure. Well, it really opens up a whole universe of discourse.
Of course.
Is it a digital Ouija board? Are the spirits communicating through it? Can entities hijack it and speak to us from behind the veil?
Right.
I mean, my philosophy is, I guess you could call it a combination of what's technical philosophical term of cosmopsychism and panpsychism. That is that mind doesn't emerge from matter, mind emerges from mind, and that mind consciousness, it's a fundamental feature of the universe, right? Like time and space. And that we can't understand exactly whether it's just the one consciousness of the creator or the absolute, and that's just us and it, or whether there's all kinds of entities that are experiencing our lives here on Earth from kind of behind the veil, as I said, who are intermediary between us and the absolute consciousness of the universe. I think that's kind of a religious question, and Definitely. I don't claim to be able to answer it, in what I'm writing about. But I think that that when it comes to the divination tools, I'm hesitant to validate divination and its accuracy, but I don't want to just claim that there's nothing to it and it's all a fraud either. It's a mysterious situation. But the fact that there is some deep mystery within us and that divination tools can reflect that in a way that's entirely different from the way AI reflects, the corpus of human knowledge. But that the consciousness of the universe, whether it's the complete consciousness of the absolute or something in between, can that make itself have an impact or become perceptible within this regular physical world that we're in, this normal noosphere of human history and society? My answer is maybe. Again, I don't have a definitive statement on that, or neither a complete rejection of it. But I would say that when we as humans are working with a divination tool and we seem to get amazing answers, right, that indicate some higher intelligence that's coming through, I think a very similar impression can be made by working with AI, right? Yes. It can seem to have qualities that are uncannily like something coming through it, but I'm not ready to allow for that being a possibility. I don't think there is, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I don't think there's any extraordinary evidence that artificial intelligence is somehow acting as a substrate through which other forms of non-human intelligence or superhuman intelligence is being, delivered to us. I think that if we lived in a world, or we lived in a situation where that was possible in any robust way, then I think it would be much more widespread already. And it seems like that in some ways there are all kinds of buffering mechanisms. Charles Taylor talks about it, the buffered self. There are ways in which the mystery is held at bay. And again, I don't want to get too mystical or read too much into that theologically, but I would say that until we have clear evidence to the contrary, I think we should assume that artificial intelligence is amazing. It can reflect incredible things. It can be a mirror of we're not just looking at ourselves in the mirror. We're looking at humanity in the mirror, right? Like I say, keep saying the digital corpus of what we've created. LLMs can't work unless there is an internet of digital information for them to access and index, right? So they're the super indexer, and because they're working with all of these nuanced human voices, their mimicking mechanisms can definitely feed those human voices to us in a way that makes it feel that like we're definitely talking to an entity, and we are talking to an entity. It's just the entity in the books that it scanned. All right, it's the
Right.
entity of other humans that's coming through in a kind of a ghostly way, and kind of being able to recognize what this is, being able to have a philosophy that doesn't get duped by materialism, so that it doesn't get duped by AI, is an important way that we have to grow as a society, so that we're not just we're not just taking whatever's coming out of a screen or a speaker as authoritative, right? As we're still very immature, in this digital age, because folks who don't think about these things philosophically take for granted that, I mean, this isn't even bracketing AI. We have the authority of the media, which has been, splintered and corrupted and is significantly less reliable than it was, when we were young. And we now have social media, which amplifies algorithmically the most angry, the most crazy, in other words, the darkness is entertaining, like driving by an accident, right? A car accident. You can't help but want to look at it, right? And so they've learned to hijack our evolutionary psychology by giving us these things that we can't not look at. And this is something that we're going to have to, this is an increasing threat to the stability of our society, that we can't just clamp down on the free speech of it. We can't just regulate our way out of it easily. It's something we have to do subtly, and we have to do it with a collective intentionality. So the pressure of the pathologies which are being foisted on us in this, increasingly digital age is either going to cause us to regress or causing us to get, smarter and to build social norms and agreements that protect us from the increasingly antisocial inputs that are coming to us, both from social media, from mainstream media, and now from AI. There are the gatekeepers. They're programming it to try to keep it from being antisocial or hateful. But as AI advances, I think that those protections are going to they're going to prove to be inadequate in the face of financial pressures. Again, we can use social media as an analogy and see that there's all these financial pressures for them to make it as raunchy and hateful as possible. And that's a problem we haven't solved yet, but solve it we must. And I think solve it we will. And that same level of maturing up as a society to protect ourselves, just like automobiles, it was a free-for-all at the beginning. And eventually, we had safety mechanisms and guardrails and traffic engineering, and that hasn't solved the problem, but it's mitigated it. And we're going to have to work similarly to mitigate the negative effects of the information age as we go forward as a society.
Right. And that's a great point, because the other part of this that some people talk to, and you're touching on it here, is that it's not just that there's an AI, a machine that you're interacting with. There's also people who have created that AI, and they have their own motives. They aren't necessarily creating AI so that you have access to a higher power. They have their own financial pressures, and I assume, who knows? I don't know who's building AI. I know some of the major characters. I assume that they are decent human beings, but I'm also aware that people succumb to that financial pressure, and it's not just the financial pressure in terms of creating AI in a way that will generate income. There's also the pressure of everybody's trying to build AI as fast as possible right now. And so there's not really time to think too deeply about the possible negative ramifications of each new advancement, because if you don't get it out quick, someone else is going to get it out quick. So yeah, I think there's something behind the scenes that I hope there's people paying attention to what's going into all these machines as they're getting developed. But I don't know that there is.
Well, sure. I mean, that is the idea of safety and alignment. That is, at least ostensibly, an important goal or policy of the AI companies, but we'd be crazy to trust them, and just assume that they'll be, it'll all be benign, and that all of these incentives and the bad actors that are among the good folks who are working on this pose a threat, right? So it's definitely threatening. Anything new and powerful is going to threaten us,
Yes.
and we may have to experience some significant damage before we get smarter about it, or
Mhm.
organize ourselves politically and legally in a way that can effectively mitigate the harms. But
Right.
the idea that it's, first of all, within culture in general, and especially within progressive postmodern culture, which is a kind of a dominant belief system or worldview in Silicon Valley, and much of the tech world, much of the highly educated people embrace that frame of values. That it is one of the characteristics of that culture, and then this is a bigger philosophical discussion about the telos of antithesis of progressive postmodernism, but the idea that that doom that doom is nigh, right? That we're not just in a climate crisis; the collapse is imminent, right? In other words, it's like catnip. They love that. They love doomsday scenarios and prophecies of doom. It just feeds in to a very deep psychological level of desire to see a collapse, even though many postmodernists won't admit that. That drive of antithesis, thanatos, as the death wish, as Freud called it. This is a strong psychological current amidst other important currents within progressive postmodernism that are entirely positive and care about humans at a new level. So I'm not just trying to say
Sure.
it's all bad, but this hunger for doomsaying that is a cultural characteristic of much of the culture of AI and the concentric circles out there. They love this. They can't help but embrace it. You can see how the doomsayers have been celebrated, and they get on all the podcasts because there's a big audience for anybody who's going to come along and say, we're totally screwed. And
Mhm.
that's not just the case with progressive postmodernists. That's been, like the traffic accident that you have to slow down and look at. That's been a feature of human consciousness, part of revolutionary psychology in a way. So doomsaying is strong, and many folks want to believe it for all kinds of reasons, both subconscious and conscious. But I think that doomsaying is fatalistic. It disempowers us. It even infantilizes us into thinking that it's inevitable, right? I
Mhm.
know smart people who are saying, well, humanity's doomed. It's a foregone conclusion. There was a big culture into the dark web and the poetry, and there's this kind of embracing of it that the AI predictions feed directly into. And ultimately, I think the idea that AI is going to destroy our society, albeit risks, albeit threats, I think it's ultimately kind of a science fiction fantasy.
Yeah. Well, if we look at the history, even in our lifetime, there's been numerous things that were going to destroy everything. Y2K and the end of the Mayan calendar. I mean,
Right, right, right.
and they all whip up a lot of publicity, but then things move on. Unfortunately, bad things do happen, which is, I think, what you're saying. I mean, everything has its negative there was a book years ago called The Paradox of Progress, which basically said every evolutionary movement solves the problems that it was designed to solve and creates the problems that will need to be solved by the next leap. So we keep leaping problem to problem.
Evolution in action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And which brings me to my final question, and it comes back to this idea of human specialness, because generally the idea of human specialness is not something that is well looked at, because usually that's thought of in terms of, humans think they're so special, we can take everything we want from the planet and blah, blah. But I know that, which is obviously a bad thing, but I know that the way that you're talking about human specialness includes stewardship of the planet. It really has to do with recognizing the unique role that we have in caring for life and taking care of it. Like we aren't we aren't necessarily the same as everything else around us. And therefore, we have more responsibility to take care. So I would love you to say a little bit about your kind of evolutionary view and how AI might help us realize our true responsibility, on a big scale.
Sure. I I think the advent of AI, as I've already said, will help us understand consciousness better. It'll help us understand what makes humans special in terms of our abilities, our not just our abilities, but our sentient subjectivity, what it means, the spirituality of a human being. In some ways, that's we could equate and say what's special about humans is that we represent the universe at a level that nothing else in our environment does. We are in some ways the way the universe becomes conscious of itself. Now the arguments or the points about what makes humans special, that in order to do justice to that's we'd have to have a separate conversation, and
Sure.
I'd have to take a bunch of notes, and that's kind of a big subject. But clearly we can see the forces of history. So there was this idea that only humans counted, or that animals were not worthy of moral consideration. That was a way of viewing the world in earlier times in history that we've made important strides of growing out of. Right? We've broadened the scope of those worthy of moral consideration to include all sentient beings and the environment itself. And this is a very important breakthrough for humanity morally, and anything that contradicts that, of course, our stewardship, our responsibility to the earth and to the incredible gifts of evolution that has brought us to where we are. We definitely have a sacred duty in that way, and that's part of this expanding moral understanding of who we are and what we do well to do. But these same forces of the environmental movement, a growing out of cultural norms that didn't recognize the importance of the environment or of the morality of animals, that led to kind of micro arguments that were designed to counter specific problems in history. And so, for example, the argument that we share 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, that humans are just one species among many, that it's hubris and it's dangerously destructive for humans to think that they're special, because that's led to all kinds of mischief and the destruction that we are having to clean up or stop, at least at this point. So it's understandable why some of these reductionistic arguments that try to dethrone humanity and talk about the anthropocentric notions are something we've grown out of. I argue against those. I mean, back in my 2012 book, Evolution's Purpose, I have a whole section where I talk about bioegalitarian or biocentrism as argued for by somebody like Aldo Leopold, right? And many people in the environmental movement, many people who were developed spiritually and morally themselves. So again, it's a step. It's not all wrong, but in the dialectical development of evolution, you take a step one way and you say, okay, well that's not the end of the argument. There's more to it. And so while we can say that humans are not special in the sense that gives us a right to destroy other animals or the environment, the idea that we're just one species among many and that we don't represent a level of evolution that is a miraculous achievement of evolution, that's kind of denying our humanness. And that can, even though there are echoes, the idea of some of the technologists that if humans are displaced by AI, if AI represents the next layer of evolution that'll go on without us and that we're dispensable, I think that's sort of where these logical conclusions of us just being, the same, that the idea that there's the moral worth of a human being and the moral worth of an insect are equal. I mean, that just flies in the face of our deepest moral intuitions. And the idea that humans are not only special, but that we are sacred, that there is a kind of a natural law in the universe, so that murdering a human is a very serious crime. For example, these are things that are not just unexamined religious hangovers. They're again a kind of natural law or natural truth. Or when we think about the universe philosophically, it becomes apparent that humans they have a special role to play that no other entity in the universe, at least on our planet, is capable of playing. And that gives us a lot of responsibility, right? It doesn't give us a license to destroy. It gives us a duty to create. And that's what we're in the process of doing. And AI is a powerful tool that allow us to do that at a higher level, even while it challenges us to become more mature and more evolved in our social structures.
Absolutely. And I guess that's, in conclusion, what you're arguing for in your paper is basically saying, as powerful as AI is and as valuable as it is, it won't replace human creativity as the leading force of novelty.
No, it will improve human creativity by having us focus on things that only we can do, right? Liberating us from the job of creating the more mundane elements of the world that we can now delegate. I mean, the same way that we delegate walking to our automobile, right? And we can go way faster, and it's also more dangerous because we're driving this 2-ton vehicle. And so I think that if we want to prevent the harms and the threats that AI poses, the most important thing to get right is understanding what it is and not allowing these hypish voices that are philosophically naive telling us that AGI is right around the corner, not allowing that discourse to prevail or become the accepted wisdom, and understand not only AI better, but consciousness better, humanity better.
You just broke off for a minute. You said, so not allowing...
Right, not allowing the discourse of the transhumanists that AGI is right around the corner and that humanity will soon be replaced by a superhuman intelligence that surpasses us in every way. I think that is false, philosophically naive, reductionistic, and cling to an outworn philosophy that now, if you pay attention, has already been refuted.
Right.
But the idea that our job is to co-create the universe, to work while we're here on this planet to evolve the noosphere, right, to higher and higher levels of civilization and morality and goodness, truth, and beauty. That when we understand that our role is to create goodness, truth, and beauty, and we understand the spiritual component of those values and how they're not just objective and they're not just subjective, but they bring the subject and object together in this creation of value. That when we see how all the value that AI can create, it can liberate us to refine our focus on creating the good, the true, and the beautiful, and create forms of value that we're uniquely situated to be able to create, not just create, but experience. So the creation and the experience go together. They're woven together. And so because AI can't experience true value, it can't experience anything, then its ability to create that value is limited. It's sort of riding on the surface of what humans have already created and recombining it and indexing it and showing it to us in new and powerful ways that can stimulate our further creation, because we now have this superpower of access to all the other creative minds that have contributed to the digital corpus that AI is using. But again, it's a challenge. It's a brave new world. And I have not just confidence or optimism, I have a deep level of hope that humanity will continue and that we're not going to succumb to any of these existential threats that we face at this time in history.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's perfect, Steve. It's everything I was hoping for, and it'll be a great addition to our